So we're a blended family. We have 5 children, and of those 5, 1 is adopted for me and 3 are adopted for Jim. So when we met, I had full custody of my 2 boys, and as we fell in love, Jim fell in love with all 3 of us. So he adopted the 2 oldest boys. We went on to have 2 more of our own, and then we all chose as a family to adopt our 5th one. That decision wasn't easily made, and it definitely had some bumps along the way. We had IVF, we had surgeries, we had losses, and we ultimately ended up on adoption. So what should families really know before they start the adoption process?
What would have helped me, I think the most important thing, and it might sound a little too general, but I think it makes all the difference, is don't believe the hype. There is a lot of mental hype and misconceptions around adoption, and there's some clear things that we'll talk to you about that I went through, I know Jamie went through, and it's really not something you need to put on your shoulders in an already big situation. You don't need any extra weight.
So some of that extra weight that comes along with adoption, and I know each of us have our own weight that we carried, but one thing that was uncomfortable for me is a lot of people would say, "Wow, you're so good. This baby's so lucky." I wasn't doing it as a rescue mission. It was a relationship. It was a part of our life. It was our family. And so it was almost really awkward when people would say, "Oh, you're so good." I didn't really know how to respond to that. And so how I would respond to it is, gosh, I feel really lucky. This is actually something I sought out. I searched for. It's not that I'm so good because this is really hard for me.
Yeah, it's a good distinction. It's not a charity project. It's a family. And so if it's looked at as a charity project, that's going to change the dynamic of the family, I think, in itself. At least it would have for us. And so we never saw it as rescue missions. We saw it as building the relationship in the family we wanted. And so we took that hype and threw it right out the window. Another part of that, putting weight on a situation that doesn't need any more weight, is the second myth of adoption. That's something that I've talked about for years. When I first got together with Jamie and fell in love with her, and then the boys came to me and asked me to adopt them, I started to share that. People would say, "Oh, again, it was almost like a rescue mission or a charity project." And they said, that's really nice, but wait until you have your own. And that always just kind of perplexed me and confused me. And I thought that people weren't being malicious, but what a terrible thing to say. It not necessarily even for me, but for those 2 young boys, I thought it was I just couldn't relate to it. And I thought it put pressure on the situation. And my second place myth, I talk about it years later when I had our first daughter, Maggie, together, Jamie and I talked about being in the hospital, and I had been told this whole thing that, I'm an adopted father, so I don't really want to know what it's like to be a real father. That word "real" came up a lot, like I was a fake father until then. And sitting in the hospital, I said to Jamie, she said, what's going on with you? I said, I don't know, I was told there was going to be this big difference in feelings towards my biological child compared to my adoptive child, and that was complete and total bullshit. There were no lines, there was no segmenting, and that puts a lot of people under pressure. I think it would have put me under pressure. Do I want to do this? Because when people say, "Oh, they're not really yours," are they going to connect to me? Am I going to connect to them? And it put a lot of heaviness on the situation. And so I would have never put that on my shoulders, because I just think it held no bearing in our last nearly 20 years as a family.
Another myth is that love just isn't enough. People think, "Oh, well, you'll get that baby home and they're going to be all better." Number one, they don't need to be made better. It's not back to that charity case situation. That's not what we're here for. But trauma, identity, and trust is a huge part of the equation, because I know that when we were preparing for the process of adoption and when we were doing foster care, which is a whole nother video, we really prepared. And I think it was like 26 books on trauma. And they have you do, we took that class that like the 9-hour class, and just learning as much as we possibly could about how the brain develops, how nutrition works, how trauma affects, and even ancestral trauma, what's in their bones and their makeup. And building trust is such a big part of that. Even the ethnicity or cultures of adopted children can be different. And so there's an identity awareness that you need to have. And so you always need to be aware of that bigger picture of their whole self and what you're stepping into, because love really isn't enough. And when people say, oh, you can just love it out of them, you can't. The same way that you can't just love some hurts out of yourself. You need to tend to it and be aware of it. So that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself to think, oh, as long as I love them, they'll be perfect. The funniest thing, recently, adopted mother said to me, they were dealing with all this trauma because of the drugs that they were exposed to, et cetera. And I said, wow, my biological children have some of the same things you're referencing, and I wouldn't even eat chocolate chips in my pregnancy. So I think children are all a present to unwrap. Don't put that pressure on yourself that, well, as long as I love them, I won't fail them, because sometimes it's not enough.
So as Jamie talked about, love is important. Really being prepared was part of the equation. Love is part of the equation, but being prepared, because there are some things that will go along with it. Again, it's not a charity case, but there's some things you want to be ready for. But even with love, even with preparing, bonding can take time. There is something very interesting that happened to me with our family situation. So when Jamie and I first got together, we had an incredible love story. It's what we were looking for. There was all sorts of dreams and writings in our journals of each other, and it finally came together. And then here are these two beautiful little boys. We hit it off famously, but that bonding still took time. And, at the age of 7 and 5, I can remember being that age. And there's a lot of curiosity, some confusion. You're tender. You're tender at that age. You're adventurous and rambunctious as a little boy, or at least I was, and our boys were. But there's some tenderness, and they had gone through some tough things. And the word dad didn't have the best. It didn't have the best meaning to them. And I remember my oldest son, again, being in a curious way, they would ask Jamie, or they'd ask me, well, what are they supposed to call me? In the beginning, I was Jim. We'd have Jim days. When's Jim coming over? And I remember my older son saying to me, and he was kind of fishing, that curious 7-year-old, and he said, hey, Leland it has called you dad a few times. What do you think of that? And I said, buddy, he can call me whatever he wants, and I'll love him just the same. I never wanted to put that pressure of calling me dad. Now, it was one of the best things that I ever heard when both of the boys started to call it, but I knew if I forced that, was I really their dad? No. And that was confirmed, if you remember. We went to one of our training classes for foster care, because we've also done foster care. And there was a story that I'll never forget that really, really, it hurt Jamie and I, but then it also made me so proud of taking that longer time to bond, because there was a story that our foster care director told us about, or our educator who was teaching the class, that there was a little boy, went to live at a family's house. They got along famously with him. They were going into the next stages of actually going from foster to adopt. And then a few months later, they returned him, which sounds horrible, almost like it's like an Amazon package or something, but they returned him. The foster agency was completely baffled. And the reason that they returned him is because this little boy was not comfortable calling the new dad, who would have been the same as me, dad. He wasn't comfortable with that. And they didn't take the time to find out that for some of us, that was a wonderful word. For this little boy, it was not. It was a very uncomfortable word attached to some really tough memories and uncomfortable situations. And he wasn't comfortable. And I don't know who that little boy was, but I can tell you, a little bit of time and space and not forcing that bonding or big decision on that, if they just give them a little time, I think that would have made a huge difference. And I think they would have gotten what they wanted because, again, that was something that the boys decided on their own. It actually became a big Christmas present hunt for us. Remember when Leland did the whole scavenger hunt and then had just under the Christmas tree, there was a note that said, I'm going to call you Dad from now on every day. And so it was like my big Christmas present of the year. It's a beautiful, beautiful moment in my life. But that took time. That took a few years. And it didn't matter to me what they called me. And I kept the promise that I would love them just the same. And I'm really glad I did, because if you force that bonding in the beginning, especially, we adopted Gloria at birth, but Alden and Leland at 5 and 7, that's a totally different situation. And you got to earn that respect and trust in any situation.
So there's a few things you got to get right in order to adopt. Things that you have to think about. Make sure that you're not buying into all the hype. You're not intensely overthinking, but you're being very mindful. And speaking of mindful, adoption takes 2 yeses. It's not a 1 yes situation. And I had a friend of mine say that to me. She always wanted to do adoption, but her husband was a no and she was a yes. And now for us, for a period of time, that's how we were. I was yes my entire life. I used to play baby dolls, and I would have dreams about people giving me their children. And quite literally, anywhere we go, that happens, right? I always find the children at the amusement park or wherever it may be. And so, but you, even though you had experienced adoption with the boys, it wasn't like you had this longing to do it. You kept saying, well, I've already done that. And so for me, it was something that just grew and grew, and it was part of my story. So one day when our daughter came to us and said, in an open forum of adults and children, and she said, if I could do anything in the world for one day and not fail, it would be to have a little sister. Now, she had talked about a little sister ever since she could speak. And we always thought, okay, well, that may not be in the cards. And to me, I remember being like, God, what's going to happen to my husband? Because I know I'm meant to adopt. Where's he going? And that's always the joke. I knew that this was in my heart. And so just pray, figure this out for us. And it was funny because when Maggie had that moment, it broke your heart open. And you came to me, and it was funny because of your personality. You're like, did you hear her? You're trying to be firm, and you're like, if you're going to do it now. As though I'm doing something.
Before I change my mind.
Right, exactly. And so it wasn't that you were the leader of the charge, but you were a yes. And you were in it. And you full love and full support and all the way in it. Because the last thing you want is to have a partner that's a maybe or a no.
No. Definitely.
Because we have a dog like that right now, and it's not working out. Imagine
that's a whole nother video. 3 dogs, not good with me.
So
1, 2, but that's a whole nother video. We'll get back to that.
So you have to be aligned with your partner. Make sure you do your trauma homework. As we mentioned before, it's important to read and to study up and to learn the things that you may be facing if your child had a troubled home, cyclical poverty, drug exposure, homelessness, some of these things that the majority of adopted children have faced in utero, or possibly if they're a little bit older when you adopt them. So do your homework. Get into groups. I have a lot of groups online that I'm a part of, adoptive groups, foster groups. Our daughter, who was born with a genetic disease, our adopted daughter who was born that way, I'm in support groups for that. And it just really helps to have a support system of people that have experienced these traumas through their children and how to help navigate those things, or adult adopted children that have navigated these to really understand how to best tend those needs now.
And on top of all of this, you got to get clear on boundaries. There are certain boundaries that have to come into play. At least for us, there would be certain boundaries that came into play. There's different things of open adoption, closed adoption. What are you comfortable with? What's going to work for your nucleus family? For me, what it started to get clear on was it was about Jamie and I, but it was what was best for the child, because, a young child cannot be worldly enough to make big decisions. That's why you're there as their parents. And so you had to figure out what was best for them, take into account things that they would ask, but or want, but you have to set certain boundaries. And again, one of the things is closed adoption or open adoption, or if there's extended family from the adoption, or even removed parents, you have to make big decisions of should they be involved. And for me, the boundary started to come: would it be safe and helpful for the child, or not safe and not helpful? And that helped kind of set the boundaries for me. But this is big lines that you'll have to decide on with your spouse, with your other children, and with the child themselves. And it's something that you will face. It's something that I faced, and something that it didn't. Once I got clear on those, it made things a lot easier.
Adoption isn't a shortcut to parenting. It's a sacred commitment. Done right, it's a gift to both parent and the child, and also a gift to the family that you're joining in this sacred commitment. They need a solution to the situation they found themselves in. You are longing for a family, new family member, a child, and it's a gift to the parent, it's a gift to the child, it's a gift to the biological family, but it has to really start with looking at some hard things and being really honest with yourself, honest with your spouse, honest with your expectations and what your hopes are to get out of it. And I think that once you take down the barriers and the fears and the myths of thinking that this is a second, this is a second choice, there's nothing worse than someone saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry you can't have your own children."
I think that one statement stops more adoptions than we'll ever know, because people buy into it and say, forget it. It's not going to really form a family. I might not bond to them. They might not bond to me. I thought I could have a real family. That word "real" again.
My own child.
And man, I guess I can only speak from sitting on both sides of the fence, and so can you now.
Same.
It just... that has been nothing but hype, nothing but myth, and I'm glad we ignored that. That's for sure.
I'm glad we got to find out, and I think that acknowledging that it's not a shortcut, it's not an easy path, it's a super purposeful and meaningful one.
Extremely rewarding. If this opened your eyes, share it with someone thinking about adoption. These are raw, real stories that Jamie and I are going to be sharing, and the more prepared we are all for adoption, the better chance every child in this world has. So thank you, and be a part of this great work.